that the solution to this problem is to enter what they call themselves a social fascist dictatorship. But the tragedy of the story is that these are young people who are idealistic and who want to change society for the better. And they entered the group on that premise. And then what they got was something that, our main source, Matthew, but others as well, describe as just a recreation of the quote unquote pain matrix.
Right. No, in reflecting on it, I am in no way trying to diminish the exploitation of being forced into housing and financial precarity to such a degree that you're essentially living the life of a junkie, a junkie, a posting junkie, right? To like where if you raise enough money, maybe you can have a bed, to the pressure we feel to either professionally or personally post on certain subjects at certain times in certain quotas. But the mirror effect, I think, is something to reflect on in the way that, I think this. I wrote this down much earlier because it came to mind first, but I think maybe this is the time to mention it. It just brings to mind so much some of the ideas of Mark Fisher's around capitalist realism, where no matter what you do, there's essentially no escape from this system that's exploiting us. And to one degree or another, you are a part of this cult. And this is just the most extreme, the most abusive form of this. But we're essentially all using the same mechanisms with the same pressures. And, right. No, I mean, that loop keeps going around and around in my head as we talk about it, because that loop is so real in our lives that, again, I think, and I said this earlier, in every good movement there are bad faith actors, and I'm finding that to be a big issue in sorting out the signal from the noise in the ratio of comms that are coming through, especially around this just dog pile of social issues, that social, political, economic issues that are all coming to a head right now, right? Like there are, every protest that's about one thing is really about 30 things because everything's fucking wrong. And we all know it. We all know that we are participating in things that are exploiting us. We all know that every time we post on Instagram, Instagram's making more off us than we are off them. But it's still our only use. It's our only platform to get out messages that are supposedly anti-Instagram, or like anti the things that Instagram and Facebook stand for. And I don't know. Yeah, this impossibility of being idealistic right now is something that I'm finding incredibly frustrating, because it does feel like there's no out, and it does seem like in some way the end, as far as this cult goes in terms of literally putting people homeless and hungry, the end game to a lot of social movements ends in this sort of pain and pleasure matrix of, group infighting and which dogma are we following. And there was the people who were protecting the autonomous zone in Seattle ended up killing like a black teenager. So it was a protest around the killing of black teenagers that ended in the killing of a black teenager, right? Like the twisted nature of that is almost too hard to handle, and the out to that is so far out to see that you can almost sympathize with getting involved in something that pretends it has its answers, and you can also see how anything that pretends to have answers has an end game that probably doesn't, because like where are those, like what can actually really happen? I mean, that's a lot of talking from me, but and it's a lot of just sort of gut and pretty emotional response to some of this story and some of my own feelings about what I'm seeing around me now. But I don't know. I mean, after in writing the story and reporting on it, and I'm sure you know, in knowing you both a little bit, reflecting on your own lives and everything that's happening, and you do touch on some of these issues in the story as well, like, you know, where do you end on all of this stuff?
Well, I think that I found a lot of inspiration in the story of Matthew, and seeing him grow over the year or so that we've been in communication, where I think he was wrestling with many of the same questions when he first left the organization, and everyone wrestles with these questions. It's kind of a lifelong thing. But we saw him become increasingly confident in his own narrative, and really, really, really grow into an understanding that freedom of thought and the ability to come to your own answers was such an important thing, and that, you know, you see through countless times in history dogmas that sound really great, but like end in, you know, exploitation or end in tragedy. And that's maybe just part of the human story. But the ability to be your own person, who does not, who, you know, takes in influences around you and kind of makes your own sense out of it, was something that he seems very grateful to have now. And he's been making incredible, I think, music. He's been making these kind of mashups.
Is this music publicly available?
Yeah, I can send it to you.
Cool.
I think, you know, we didn't, this isn't what the story was about, but he is, you know, his music specifically recently has been creating these kind of mashups of different songs and melodies that he kind of like clung to, or that piqued his interest when he was like recreating his own belief system independent of the organization. And that, yeah, kind of it's also a celebration of the internet, where, you know, in a good way,
right,
where you can, you know, you're swimming in all of this information at all times, but there will be, you know, something that really arrests you, and these things that you grab onto can then be, you know, woven into your sense of your sense of the world and your vision,
right,
and your narrative, and his music is enacting that.
Right.
And I just think it's, you know, and that's something that cult experts will often talk about, that the process of recovering from something like this is finding yourself, finding the person that you that you were before, obviously informed by your own experiences,
right,
in an organization like this. But there's something beautiful. Obviously, we're always all going to be conditioned by society, but finding your own path, not letting somebody else tell you the path that you need to follow.
Yeah,
because then you're just going to get conditioned by, you know.
Right.
It's.
Yeah,
so,
no, I find that conclusion to be inspiring in its way. And that, I think, in some ways is where I tend to net out as well, which is, um, freedom ultimately comes from freedom of the self and freedom of the mind, no matter what social conditions you're under. Um, and there's people have written about this, about a lot of oppressed cultures who have used various forms of self-expression to exert freedom, like James Scott is a historian and sociologist who writes about the hidden art of resistance in different sort of dominated cultures and their subcultural resistance codes that they've used in various times and places, right? So, like, that is something that I think does radiate and bounce around these platforms and the internet and in our social spheres. What I just have to dive into this sort of tricky water, because it's, I think, important to actually put a finer point on it than I was before, which is a problem I'm currently having with the way very important social justice, political justice, economic justice conversations are happening is so dictated by the codes of conduct of the platforms in which they're happening, and also the sort of serotonin sort of pleasure mechanisms that those platforms provide. And literally, I've found myself from a DM conversation in Instagram in one tone, just switching over to the interface of a message, like a iMessage, where literally just the interface changes and the tone of voice changes because you're no longer within Instagram. And just the interface now makes you feel more like you're talking to a person. And then obviously the next step is phone, and the next step is face to face. But you get further and further abstracted from other people and the nuances of their experience, and more into this dogmatic territory that does border on this type of binary, and I'd say potentially fascist, not necessarily thinking, but definitely structures that I think is ultimately dangerous and does a disservice to the social, political, and economic movements it's claiming to help and promote. And that's a tough point to make, and I'm going out on a limb to make it, because I think it's important for any movement that I consider myself to be a part of to have moments of self-reflection and self-critique. And I think outliers like a cult like this are good times to reflect on ways in which we might be constructing ourselves more productively. I don't know. Does any of that resonate with either of you in terms of how you reflect on this piece in relation to, like, our very, very sort of up to date, like, yesterday current moment?
Well, it's not an exact one-to-one comparison, because this group's rhetoric does not, it will appear on first glance to be in line with social justice conversations, right, or anti-racist conversations, but then when you look closer, it's like it's very off. Like there's no, and I need to archetypes. Yeah, like there's archetypes based on being a woman,
right,
and
right,
a man is allowed to critique the ways in which a woman is incarnating her gender within the context of this group, like things that would not be considered acceptable.
Right. No, and just to interject for myself and for the public record, in no way was I saying that the rhetoric was comparable, or one thing was trying to do, they were trying to, or even close to the same mark in end goal, or even a rhetoric, or the fact that one is necessary and important and one is obviously exploitative. But I think I was just reflecting on the mechanisms at play, and the ways in which Um,